Joining me now to discuss Charlie Hurt, Tammy, Bruce, Christopher Bedford, and Mercedes Schlapp. Charlie, what do you make of it all? Because I think Donald Trump has been really effective in the last 24 hours from deflecting from the fact that he did lose Iowa.
Yeah, well, and that attack that he's gone on after Ted Cruz, I think is particularly effective. Because basically, you know, Ted Cruz's entire campaign, his entire reason for existence is that he's going he's the outsider. He's not part of Washington. But of course, the tactics that we saw in Iowa that Donald Trump has been highlighting, and that Ben Carson was so upset about, this notion that, you know, Ben Carson was getting out of the race, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. That's exactly the kind of dirty tricks, dirty politics that people associate with Washington. And so I think it is actually a very, very effective attack on Ted Cruz. And if Ted Cruz doesn't take it very seriously, I think that he could wind up facing some blowback from voters in New Hampshire and beyond.
You know, here's the thing, just to give folks a timeline. 7:45, CNN did go out with the report that said Carson's going back to Florida regardless of how he does in Iowa, and that he's going to stay there for several days. And this is the part that you can see where people might have said, not going to South Carolina, not going to New Hampshire, but to D.C. for the National Prayer Breakfast on Thursday. Mercedes, that sort of got the ball rolling, and of course the Cruz campaign jumped on it from there.
You know, you can't blame the Cruz campaign. I mean, they probably have sharper elbows than the Carson campaign. And really, between the CNN reporting this, almost creating this misinterpretation or assumption, and the Carson campaign basically not responding, but it took a while to kind of feed through and get through these to where people would understand what was going on. He clearly sent a message, the Carson campaign, that something was happening in his campaign by not going to New Hampshire, not going to South Carolina, and going to Florida to go get clothes. And now Carson's complaining. So again, Ted Cruz did apologize. Should they have sent the follow-up statement from Carson's campaign? Absolutely. But it's politics. And let me tell you, Carson should have been in Iowa. That's where he should have been, not flying off to Florida. You
know, Christopher, before I go to you, I want to listen to Ted Cruz, actually. I think this is Ted Cruz actually responding to all of this.
It is no surprise that Donald is throwing yet another temper tantrum, or if you like, yet another Trumper tantrum. It seems his reaction to everything is to throw a fit, to engage in insults, and I understand that Donald finds it very hard to lose, that he finds that very difficult for him. But at the end of the day, the Iowa people spoke. Donald Trump guaranteed a victory in Iowa, and then he lost. And he doesn't like that, and his reaction is that he breaks down.
So we do have two things here, right? Number one, Donald Trump did lose Iowa, and I don't think that this changed the dynamics of that. But someone would argue on the slime factor of 1 to 10, maybe it's a 7 because Ben Carson's camp tweets out at 7:50, we're going to get fresh clothes. And then at 8 o'clock, the Cruz camp says, hey, notify supporters that Carson is dropping out or could be dropping out. So you can see where both sides have a sort of the narrative here. It's the big question is which one will win out?
I think the person who's actually going to win out from all of this is going to end up being Marco Rubio, because Ted Cruz in New Hampshire has a ceiling. He's a social conservative, and New Hampshire's a New England state. There's not too much he's going to grow beyond that. For Donald Trump, who's a little weakened by this loss, to be focusing all of his firepower on Ted Cruz right now, as opposed to Marco Rubio, who got so close to him, is great for him. Well, Rubio gets the surge in New Hampshire. The Twitter thing, we were in Iowa, I was in Des Moines. I didn't see a lot of people checking Twitter. Twitter's a lot more of a popular thing amongst maybe D.C. journalists to communicate back and forth with each other, more than it is something that was moving any of the people, especially Ted Cruz's voters in Iowa. He's going to push forward in that, but I think Charlie was also right. If Trump can paint Cruz as a D.C. insider who's using these smear tactics and can't be trusted, like the whole Trust Ted slogan goes, that will hurt him. But Rubio so far is the one who's really going to win from this in New Hampshire. All
right, so on the public side of this, Tammy, I understand what's happening here, but I will tell you, Rush Limbaugh said that the reason Trump lost in Iowa was because he came across as a liberal Democrat. So no matter what's happening in the public arena and the earned media that Donald Trump gets from this, You wonder if his campaign is trying to retool the message otherwise to voters.
No, look, if he was going to retool it, he should have done. I was very impressed with his concession speech. People were thrilled that he was so mature. And less than 24 hours later, he turned into an 8-year-old. Look, people don't like sore losers. We know Mr. Trump lost. He's now a sore loser. And I also find it rather ironic. This is the man who has been charging that Ted Cruz is ineligible to be president because he's a Canadian. Now, that is not true. That probably affected some voters, and it can be argued that it's fraudulent. So I find it a little silly that this is Mr. Trump's biggest complaint. At this point, if Mr. Trump is really going to have learned a lesson from Iowa, it's that the Iowans rejected the nature of this exhausting temper tantrum type of campaign. Americans are reacting, I think, in general as well. We also saw that he may be the Wizard of Oz, that there was no real new registrations coming in. He didn't generate any newbies. There's no surge. And so New Hampshire is very different, absolutely. He may win there, but we also are looking to polls right now after clearly Iowa showed us that polls can't be trusted.
Tammy, you always say that people vote for something and not against something. There was a record turnout amongst Republicans.
Yes, there was.
And Ted Cruz got the most votes ever for a GOP candidate.
Yes.
Donald Trump got the second most ever. Does that sort of belie your theory? Because you could argue that the pundits said that if there was a big surge in new voters, it would give Donald Trump the edge.
In new voters, but these weren't new. These were already registered individuals who maybe hadn't been voting and were.
But the point is, it felt that you think some people were motivated to come out to vote against rather than for.
In some ways, yes. In voting against Donald Trump in this regard, you were actually voting for the thing that mattered to you the most, which was campaigns in a nation and a president based in dignity and having respect. So while you were voting perhaps against Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz was the anti-Trump candidate, but most people still were voting, as you've noted, for the two people that were standing against the establishment. But in the middle of that, people were also voting for campaigns based in at least some kind of respect for the process and respect for the voter as well.